I want to thank the chair and ranking member for convening today's hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for participating in this very important conversation. Mr. Chairman, transporting freight efficiently and effectively is the linchpin of a prosperous economy. Few states play a greater role in our national freight system than my home state of Illinois. It is the epicenter of our rail network and our inland waterways system. To compete in a 21st century global marketplace, we must consider our transportation system as a competitive advantage. Unfortunately, this advantage is rapidly eroding. Mr. Policinski, broadly speaking, do you agree with the American Society of Civil Engineers that the United States has somewhere in the ballpark of about $2 trillion in infrastructure investment gap over the next 10 years?
Not only do I agree with it, but I hope that people would shout it from the rooftops over and over again. It is a driving force. The need is so great. We can't look the other way. And comments that Senator Shelby made about a bipartisan approach. It's very important to the country that we do this, not just economically solving this problem, but the idea that Congress can come together and address such an important issue that has such a direct impact on jobs is something that we cannot just turn from. The steps that this committee has made and Congress has made to put freight forward have been dramatic and very important, but our job isn't done. People often say, well, we have to do more in freight because there'll be 70 more million Americans by the year 2045. Well, there'll be 2 billion more people on this earth in 2045. And those people will reside in countries and economies that will be competing for our businesses, for our jobs, for our income. So the idea that we have a shortfall in how we fund our freight program, how we fund our highways and our ports, is a dramatic statistic, and we cannot look away from it because literally freight is the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. Mr. Parker, with that $2 trillion gap, would you agree that our inland waterway system requires somewhere around $110 billion over 10 years to rebuild our locks, levees, and dams?
Well, our diesel fuel taxes that we pay, we generate about $110, $115 million per year, which is matched right now. So we need to continue that, but if we do the policy change that we talk about, where we can get back to a $400 million per year program, that will go a long way to getting this our locks and dams, particularly our older locks and dams, modernized, up to date, and make sure that we keep the industry in Illinois competitive in world markets.
I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, speaking to what my colleague, Senator Moran, mentioned, we had bumper crops the last several years in Illinois, but the southeastern United States bought corn and soybean from Brazil because they could get their crops into the United States faster than we could move crops down to Mississippi from Iowa and Illinois, and we still have silos that are filled with grain. My concern is that the president has secured now a $1.5 trillion tax cut that is geared towards large corporations and the ultra wealthy. I hope that we can finally see the details of his plan to rebuild our aging infrastructure. Unfortunately, the president and his allies prioritize the trickle-down shell game over building up middle class through the proven economic engine of infrastructure investment. And this is, to me, a really disturbing trend. Mr. Speer, your testimony suggests that the president's budget, a roadmap of his policy priorities that cuts $150 billion from transportation spending, is misguided as it relates to infrastructure investment.
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's misguided, but it's certainly inconsistent with what we've been advocating. We go big, we go bold, and we're willing to pay more. We're already paying half the tab into the trust fund as the trucking industry, and we're only 4% of the vehicles on the road. Mm-hmm. But when you're moving 70% of the domestic freight in this country, that's our backyard. You invest in your backyard. That's our plant, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So having good roads and bridges reduces the amount of maintenance. It reduces congestion costs. These are all measurable returns for, raising the fuel tax. It hasn't been done since '93. Had it been indexed, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. Mm-hmm. And the lack of funding coming down to the states and localities and to connect all the modes and to address the economic demand, states are picking up the slack, and they're doing a lot of things that are destructive to our industry. They impede our ability to grow and embrace interstate commerce and really serve consumers, the way we would expect.
Thank you. Thank you. In my last 12 seconds, I just want to say that, during the campaign, President Trump repeatedly suggested that repatriating overseas corporate revenue could pay for robust infrastructure investments. And unfortunately, those revenues were exclusively used to buy down the corporate tax rate in this new tax bill. And zero repatriated dollars will actually be set aside for infrastructure. And there's about $1 trillion there. The Republican tax bill also preserved a loophole that allows hedge fund and private equity managers to pay capital gains rates on their carried interest, which President Trump repeatedly pledged to eliminate. Responsible reforms that close this loophole would generate enough revenue to rehab every lock on the inland water system twice. Adding insult to injury, President Trump reportedly will rely on budget cuts to pay for his infrastructure proposal, cuts that will hurt Illinois families and businesses. So let me just summarize. Despite all their rhetoric, the president and his allies did nothing to plan for infrastructure investment in their budgets. In fact, they cut infrastructure spending by almost $200 billion. Their trickle-down tax bill does nothing to build up infrastructure. And now the president plans to pay for his proposal on the backs of hardworking Illinois families while preserving handouts for Wall Street. I hope we can dispense with shell games next year. 44 million jobs rely on our freight transportation network. We need to roll up our sleeves and get serious about how we're going to invest in our infrastructure and grow our economy, because countries we're competing against like South Korea and Japan and China, they're making these investments and we're not. And we're going to get left behind when we should be dominating the world. And so with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.